as Sean, as you know, as a friend and colleague of Paul, he said that we need to do weird stuff. We need to do stuff that nobody else is doing. We need to do stuff that nobody else is going to think of. But there's no point in going, oh, that looks a good idea because it's going well for them. We need to do that as well. How do we get that kind of imagination going?
Yeah, it is really important that we don't, over-prescribe where we're going. I think the danger of sort of a, very, very strong vision and over-prescription is that we do head over a cliff, right? We don't take advantage of those other opportunities. And I think, actually, the Scandinavian countries are a great example that Sir Peter was talking about before, where they had this conversation about diversifying. They knew that they were up against the same sort of issues with commodities, and they were thinking about this 20, 30 years ago. And they diversified their economies greatly. It actually, they've also increased their agricultural productivity immensely as well at the same time.
Finland, which didn't really work too well as an example for David Shearer, but nevertheless, we think about Nokia.
Yeah.
Have they got other stuff going on there?
Yeah, it's actually quite impressive what goes on.
It's not just dominated by Nokia.
So it's not just dominated by Nokia. There's a large number of other companies that work in the tech sector in Finland. And in fact, Nokia probably wouldn't have been successful without this ecosystem of other technology companies working around it. The Finns have also still got a strong forestry industry, and they still export a lot of paper and pulp. So they still have a strong primary sector as well as developing this diverse high tech sector.
So we could carry on like that, doing the commodities that we are a bit embarrassed about sometimes. All these logs shipped off, and we don't do anything to them, and they're not value added. But we can do that as well as the other stuff.
I just want to think about Paul Callaghan for a moment. He's an example of what you might call the serendipity we must support. Who would have thought that New Zealand would have been a world leader in nanotechnology? Who would have thought of it?
Yeah, so
there's no logical reason to do it other than we had a talent and a personality who built a team and an ecosystem of science around him, which then spread out into the private sector. Now, we've got to allow that will always happen, and we need to get better at identifying those people and building off them. To take another example of opportunity that stares us in the face, unfortunately, we know a lot about earthquakes, but we also have some of the best earthquake engineers in the world. And there's large parts of the world with large populations that need our expertise and our knowledge. We should be exploiting the sad experiences we've had to see how we can use that in areas ranging from urban redesign through to earthquake engineering at different levels. There's many opportunities for us. We've just got to think in a more innovative, lateral thinking, empowering way and grab the opportunities as a small country as they come by. That's what entrepreneurs do.
As long as we don't use Christchurch as a poster child for our efficiency at building earthquake-proof buildings.
No, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying, what I do want to get across, entrepreneurs seize the opportunities when they come by. If we want to succeed as a little country in the world, we need to be entrepreneurial as a country, not just around people like Derek and people like that. We've got to see it, that's something that we've got to grab, because we're not going to have that many opportunities, and when they come, we've sure as hell got to grab them.
But I've been looking at a report that came out last year called Powering Innovation, and it had specific recommendations about the Industrial Research Limited, and it talked about, we have a low-level investment in research and development. We need the development of an all-science-based economy. We need an innovation ecosystem. We have a lack of connectivity, which we've spoken about already today, failure to retain skills, failure to learn from Finland, Denmark, Israel, Queensland. Why don't we do this yet? Every damn year there's a report that comes out like this, isn't there? Sorry, I'm looking at you, Sir Peter. I'm looking at you. You're in the Prime Minister's office. Do something. No, my point is that this doesn't change. Nothing seems to change,
Well, I think
it?
with respect, things are changing. I mean, not as fast as we would like them to change, but that's because the political process is a reflection of community values and community priorities. At the end of the day, politicians can go so far, but the community also needs to want to go there. And I think one of the differences, and it was alluded to, I think, in the question you asked Caroline much earlier, is if you go to these other small countries we would like to compare ourselves to, everybody in the community takes pride in their science and innovation systems. Now, that's changing here. I think Paul Callaghan's had an enormous amount to do with changing that. I think a number of other people, including some of the other members of this panel, have had a lot to do with it as well. It is changing. But at the end of the day, politicians will move at a pace that their community wants them to move at. That's what I've learnt in the 3 years I've been in the job, and I think the community needs to own this challenge as much as anybody else.
With all due respect, they'll do that if it suits them. But if they want to do something that the community isn't behind, they'll do that as well. Do you know what I mean?
You can say that.
and leadership is leadership. You know, it's not hanging around and waiting to see if eventually people might think that it's a good idea.
No, but I think we saw what happened. I think that we can see that the situation is changing. I think that there is an uplift in the pace of demand for us to be a cleverer country, to invest in innovation, to create the innovation systems. And we're starting to see elements of change in the political process on both sides of the House, which demands that change is turned into structure. It's hard. It's not easy to change systems at a time of constraint economically. It's hard.
Let's look on the bright side for a moment, and we've talked about smaller countries that we could take as models. Derek, do you think that New Zealand actually has an advantage in being small? Oh, too slow. You don't. You can't see any advantage in it.
You're talking generically. I'm sure it does in specific areas, in specific situations. I don't know, if it's a huge advantage, just carte blanche. I mean, if you're small and you kept getting told no in this country, and you have enough boldness, and you go overseas and you build a company and bring it back here, then it's because it was small and you didn't quite understand what you were trying to do that became an advantage. But if you're trying to get meetings in big places and you're trying to get big discussions happening, sometimes it might not work. A lot of people still, but a lot of people still don't even know where we are. Like, they don't even know what the country is.
No, we don't want to deal with those people.
I think, small countries do have an advantage when you look at the stats, right? Small countries outperform big countries on measures of innovation. And so there's something really interesting that takes place.
You mean relatively per capita?
Per capita, yeah, on that per capita basis. And I think it's partly because they're able to have the sort of discussion we're having today a lot easier than you can, say, in the United States. The United States, of course, is the poster child for science and innovation, but actually getting communities in the United States to change direction on lots of scientific issues is very, very difficult. And I think in a small country, we do have that advantage that we can have this conversation.
The other thing that does occur to me about that, and it's more as kind of sociological reflection, is that people, live next door to Peter Jackson. They live down the road from Paul Callaghan. They bump into Sean Handy at the Superette. Do you know what I mean? It's like, we mix and mingle. We can be examples to each other without losing the closeness.
So that is the latent possibility. That's where the opportunity is, right? We're small enough to all get in a room and say, do we want to change something? Yes, we do.
Let's
we
do
can.
it.
Exactly. I think this discussion is almost like, isn't that kind of part of what we're trying to achieve?
And I think we undersell ourselves. I mean, we've tended to go into a slightly negative tone at times in this conversation.
It's my fault, I'm sorry.
If you add up the economic output of advanced countries with populations less than 20 million people, it equals the economic output of China. Although we're a much smaller percentage of the world's population. 2% of the world's population producing about 20% of the world's economic productivity. And that makes the point that Sean was making, that small countries do seem to be able to be more innovative. There's lots of reasons why it can happen. We are actually pretty good at technology transfer from the public to the private sector. People who come here from Britain or from around the world actually say we're very good at it. We knock ourselves a lot. And I think we're not as good at looking at ourselves well and identifying what we really do well and doing more of it. We're actually quite good at knocking ourselves too much of the time. And I think that it's part of the national psyche, for whatever reason, of sitting down here geographically isolated, to look at ourselves and see all the things that don't go well. I actually think we're doing bloody well in many ways.
And a British delegate, and I don't know if he's in the audience, just said to me before, he said, wow, this is amazing. I think you're all being hard on yourself. This would not happen in Britain. And having come out of the British academic system, I can tell you, yeah, it's a lot easier in New Zealand to get connections across. And I guess if I'd have changed something in New Zealand, it was this tall poppy syndrome. We should be celebrating, lauding and looking after our leaders and our innovators. Instead, they get nip, 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 and not supported in the way that they should be.
They get knighted. What are you talking about? I don't subscribe to this tall poppy syndrome at all, actually.
Oh, it's interesting. We do a lot of economic strategy work in the unit, and one of the key things that came out going around the communities and doing that was this issue that if somebody put their head up to take the innovative step forward of something, and OK, the ones that have done it will get knighted, but there's not that many knights out there. I'm thinking of, bad luck, I'm thinking of, there should be 100 entrepreneurs in all our communities. And I'm not just talking here business, I'm talking about community entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship. And the big thing that got back to us was, yes, but they feel unsupported, they don't get the support within the communities, they don't even get the backup, because often the person who's the innovator isn't perhaps the person who can go around and raise the funds, isn't perhaps the person who go around and write the business plan. So, no, we're going to have a fight.
Mm. I was thinking about that before, actually. There's a saying in Maori that the kumara does not talk about its sweetness. And it strikes me that that may be an explanation for different cultural differences, but it's just another way of saying the tall poppy syndrome, is it? The kumara does not speak about its sweetness.
And I think we have to, one of the things we're talking about, bringing the community alongside and telling them what the value of science is, we've got to go out there and tell them the value proposition, tell them what we're doing, tell them what's wonderful, tell them the things that are going on within New Zealand universities, CRIs, and the hospitals or whatever.
It's not just science. It's science, it's the humanities, it's the broader aspects of the intellectual arts and sciences. I think that, we're gathered here in part to remember Paul Callaghan. Paul's one of our few people we could actually identify as a public intellectual. We need a greater intellectual discourse in this country.
And that wasn't because he knew what he was talking about all the time either, actually.
No, you and I can both say that.
But he had this huge curiosity to find out. And that's what it was all about, wasn't it? That's what it is all about.
And I think that this country will be richer if we could have a richer intellectual conversation, not just amongst the sciences. The sciences aren't here and the humanities are over there. It's all part of one rich fabric which will lead to a better country. And we need to break down some of these silos, have far better conversations. We've been working for the last 30-odd years to get a better conversation between Maori and Pākehā. I think we've got to work hard to get a better conversation between different groups in different domains as well. And that, I think, could enrich this country, and it will enrich it both culturally, socially, and economically. It will pay off.
I understand that what you all seem to be saying is that science cannot be separated from society, and that as part of all the other aspects of the way we are, it can contribute to prosperity. But I just want to ask, some people have the impression that the government is saying we need to get more prosperous before we can invest in science. We need to get richer before we increase the spend. And I'm looking at you, Sir Peter, again. Is that not the wrong way round? Is that not the wrong way round? Would you not say that's the wrong way round? We won't get richer unless we invest more in science.
I think I can't disagree. I think the issue is how that investment is made and who makes it. Some of it is from the government, some of it's from the private sector. We have a problem. We have a large number of very small companies, and we may need to look at some different models. We may need to look at aggregation models to encourage better use of science by the private sector because of our dominance of very small companies.
What would that mean, an aggregation model? Caroline?
Well, I don't know. I was just going to pick up before I get to that one, is that I think Peter raised a really important point when he talked about economics and said that, economics was this neoclassical model where we were all rational and very competitive. And New Zealand, I think, went down that route. I'm not against competition, don't get me wrong, but we've got, I think, just a bit too much of competing amongst each other and this individualism, and we've got to start out looking collectively, and perhaps this is what Sir Peter's meaning now about aggregated different models of working together. We've got enough competition outside in the world than to start competing with ourselves all the time. And so I think different